right, well, thank you, Tim. Thanks, AutoMobility and CNET for bringing this topic up. It's amazing how far we've come. So last night I got on YouTube and I watched the 2013 presentation of the same subject, just to see the difference. And then they only gave him, Karl, you were the moderator, and they gave you 15 minutes to talk about cybersecurity. We got 30 minutes. So already the problem's doubled, which is great. But if you look at actually what's happened over the past few years, there was really a question about how much of the investment, what's really the return on investment in this space, and is there really a return on investment? There was a question on why would anybody ever hack on a car? We had some guy named Chris Valsic on that panel, which those of us that know this environment, Chris certainly made a splash for himself later on that year. There was discussed about an ISAC, an Information Sharing Analysis Center. There was a concept being built. And we were just talking about bug bounties. Would OEMs actually pay somebody to identify a threat, identify a vulnerability in a car? So cybersecurity really has become a critical theme within the automotive industry, not just with the automotive manufacturers, but also with the suppliers. Really enhancing the connectivity in the ecosystem, improving the user experience. All of this can't happen unless you have a strong foundation with cybersecurity. A great quote I've heard is, this is not a market differentiator. The OEMs are sharing this information around cybersecurity because if you're not secure, you're not going to play in this space. And it's really amazing to see how the industry has come together, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. Tim introduced some of our panelists earlier. We're lucky to have 3 leaders in the industry. We're going to hear from each one for about 5 minutes, a short presentation about what's actually happening in the automotive industry. And then we're going to flip it to you all. We'll have a conversation, flip it to you for questions. I want to pull you in the conversation so it's just not us. But I want to remind you, if you do have a question, we have mics set up in the middle here. And just queue up when we start getting towards the end of the presentation and we can be ready to answer and ask questions. So with that, Karl, why don't you kick us off and tell us your view in this space.
Thank you, John. So, good afternoon. I'd like to open with 2 references. The first reference is from General Motors' president, who said, the next 5 years this industry will experience more change than the past 50. And to sort of drive that point home and reinforce it, the second reference, though it's become kind of standard nowadays to compare the complexity or number of lines of codes in a modern luxury vehicle, 100 billion, with airplanes and jet fighters and that kind of stuff. SEI out of Carnegie Mellon had a very interesting comparison. This one's really interesting. They compared it with a mouse. Not the thing connected to a computer, but the furry little thing with beady eyes that evades your best laid traps and humiliates your cat and makes it off with your crackers and cheese. At 100 million lines of code, the car is slightly less complex than the base pairs in the mouse genome, an intelligent, adaptive creature that can live outside, inside, has a complex environment. Cars are becoming incredibly complicated. And industry is doing a fantastic job of making them functional and starting down the security path. But there's roles for other organizations such as the states. I want to discuss what Michigan's doing. Michigan is always there for its iconic industry, the automotive industry, both with supporting its activities and also anticipating its needs. I express this in 3 different ways today. One is unity or collaboration. As John said, we cannot individually and stovepipe solve this. There has to be a common basis. And Michigan is a champion in collaboration with an industry, government to government, government to industry, et cetera. Second, capability, infrastructure capacity. There is a need for test beds and test capabilities which are common to all and which are more extensive than any individual company or set of companies can make. And Michigan is a world leader in this space. I'll get into more detail on that in a moment. And last, this is science fiction without talent. And so the ability to create engineers who understand automotive and cyber and other things like electrical engineering is crucial and not currently sufficiently served. Welcome to Planet M. Planet M is Michigan's collection of activities associated with mobility. It puts it under a common umbrella and improves collaboration across the state. I want to highlight a couple of the components of that. The first is something you probably have all heard, which is M-City, which is M-City. It's a 32-acre campus at the University of Michigan. It was instituted, developed as the world's first and largest connected smart vehicle test facility. It is a V2I, or vehicle to infrastructure test bed. and is run by academia, but certainly is under the M-City umbrella, or the Planet M umbrella today. The second, accentuating the collaboration between Michigan and the federal government, is the Eluding Exercise conducted this last June along I-69. This had several military vehicles through TARDIC, a military organization, on Michigan active roadways in collaboration with MDOT, in collaboration with the Michigan Police, going across county lines to practice a handover on authorities for control of the vehicles, etc. As you might imagine, military vehicles are put into slightly more aggressive environments than many of our cars on the road today, and cybersecurity is a core feature for how we build these vehicles in, and also how they act on the roadways. So this roadway is something we call part of the smart corridor. More of that in a moment. So the smart corridor is currently very large, and in 2 years will be more than 350 miles of intelligent, connected V2I roadway. It will be in urban environments, it'll be in the middle of cities, it'll be in small towns, it will be in suburbia, and it will be in a rural environment, giving the most expansive and largest test bed in the nation. Lastly, I want to talk about the American Center for Mobility. Just announced this unique capability has been announced. It'll be funded at $20 million initially through MEDC. The MDOT just gave it $13 additional million. This is an environment to have self-certification capability of suppliers and OEMs of their products. It also brings in the capability to do cybersecurity work on vehicles. Cybersecurity being a key part of Michigan's strategy, it is considered for phase 1 of ACM, which will have IOC, or initial operating capacity, in 2018. Groundbreaking is this coming Monday. So this is a great place to test cars and trucks on roads. It has a connection to a railhead. It has a connection to an active airport, so multimodal tests are possible, as well as V2I infrastructure things. So talent development, again, it's science fiction without the talent piece. We don't, I don't believe, anywhere, produce the kind of engineers that are natively adapted to automotive cybersecurity. This is something that we're beginning. We've solicited from OEM suppliers and security companies for lists of what they think a cybersecurity person should have, their capabilities. We've collected this list from several. We're still doing outreach for some more. We're harmonizing the list and establishing what those core capabilities are. Then, after buy-in from the different stakeholders, we'll give this list to universities in Michigan so they can provide curriculums that ideally position these kinds of engineers with the companies. Importantly, there's 2 internships. One is with a maker, so somebody that makes a product, OEMs, suppliers, and one is with a breaker, somebody that hacks vehicles for a living. And so when the graduates come out, they've been on both sides, they have contacts with both sides, they have experience with both sides, and they're better able to serve the industry and the nation. So Michigan, collaboration, world-leading infrastructure capability, and talent creation. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Dan, why don't you give us your view?
Right. All right, so imagine this. It's early in the morning. You're late for work. And it's your turn to drop the kids, of course, just because you're late for work. And outside, it's cold as in hell, Michigan. And this is really not something you want to happen on a day like this. So you basically have to pack up the car in a cold car. Kid is obviously not happy about being put in a cold car. And on top of that, you're late. So then this happens. Basically, your IVI screen is telling you that your car has been locked. There's no way that you can start up your car. There's no way that you can heat up your car. And, of course, the kid is now desperately unhappy. So what do you do in a situation like this? Do you just put the kid in the wife's car, who's nice and warm in the garage, and pretend you accidentally took the wrong car? Or are you actually going to pay up the $200 in bitcoins that the ransomware people actually demand from you? Most people would actually pay. That's been proven with other industries that have been prone to ransomware attacks. In this year, we've seen ransomware attacks in hospitals, for example. and there has not been any way to get around that. Technically, this is absolutely possible in automotive environment as well, even if we haven't seen anything like this yet. But the possibility is absolutely there. The reason for that is ransomware has become a very lucrative business for hackers. There's too much stolen data out there, and as supply of something goes up, prices go down. It's very difficult to monetize that, and therefore hackers are looking at other ways to monetize their hacks. So hacking as a concept was introduced to the general public in 1983 for the movie War Games. And in that sense, it was presented in a way as a cat and mouse game. And I would say that it's actually very much true. Hacking is a cat and mouse game. So I'm going to give you an example. Since we're here in LA, I'm going to give you some examples from the movie and Hollywood industries, or pay TV, pay media, and so forth, what they've been going through in the last 20 years. So basically, the pay TV industry went digital in 1995, and that opened up, of course, a whole new range of problems for that particular industry. So it started off with researchers, academics beginning to explore how you could expose the technology for research purposes. The good thing with academics, when they hack something, they actually tell you about it, and they publicize everything they do, so the industry can actually improve the systems and do something about it. And I think that's the stage where we're at in the automotive industry right now. There's researchers and academics that point out there's weaknesses here and there that could be potentially exposed for bad purposes. But then, as we kind of move into this, there are hackers that actually access this information, and they begin to look at how can we actually monetize these hacks and how can we actually make money from this. And that's exactly what happened for the first 10 years in the pay TV industry. And as you see the pattern here as well, it's very much like there's a hack, there's a response, there's a hack, there's a response. So the hackers, to some extent, are actually in control here. It's almost like a Tom and Jerry cartoon where the mouse is actually in charge rather than the cat. But then, as we move into the next stage, when the industry actually begins to get connected to the internet, that opens up another range of possibilities and other type of problems. So now, the hackers are actually shifting their focus to other weakest links in the system and try to expose those. And then at the same time, we're seeing new types of devices popping up. There's, even platforms that offer pirated content. So again, it's becoming a cat and mouse game. But with the internet, you have the advantage that as a provider, you can actually also monitor a lot what's going on with hackers. You can monitor forums, you can understand what's going on. So with the internet, actually the industry were able to do proactive response to hacking. And therefore, by finding out what hackers do, you can proactively put out new releases that would put the hackers back to square one. In the first 10 years of pay TV, that was not possible. But now we actually come to a stage where the level of investment that a hacker have to do in the pay TV industry is very, very high. And therefore, hackers are beginning to look at other potential industries to go after because there's not enough money to be made in an easy way. So what does that mean for automotive industries and so forth? I think there's a couple of conclusions here that you really need to proactively fight piracy. It's not only a cat and mouse game in the sense that you get a hack and then you respond to it. You actually have to be advanced as a hacker. You need to utilize intelligence and information to combat piracy in that sense. So if you actually live in a place like Hell, Michigan, and it's really cold, and you really want to make sure that you can protect yourself from cyber criminals, there's always non-connected aftermarket solutions, and I can guarantee you that no hacker will be able to mess with this one. Thank you.
Faye, on the job for 2 weeks as the new executive director of the Automotive ISAC. Welcome, and look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, John. How many of you know what an ISAC is? Oh, there's a few. That's great. I know most of you know what automobiles are, and so now that we are sufficiently scared, I'm going to start telling you about what an ISAC is doing to help prevent the risk of what we just heard about. So I don't know a lot about automotive, but I know a lot about aviation and ISACs, because I just stood one up. And the aviation community has also come together, just as the automotive industry is, in standing up an ISAC. So an ISAC really is a central point for cybersecurity coordination and a communications for the global automotive industry to support sharing of threat intelligence, vulnerabilities, risks, and mitigation techniques. And this coming together helps us crowdsource across the industry what we need to do to ensure we're protecting our industry and the very cars that all of you drive. Let me talk a little bit about how we got started. We started a little over a year ago, FOC in January, and we focused on the vehicle product security. So that first top line is where we are focused. We have plans to go and examine the infrastructure as well as the extended enterprise in the future. And as we look at this and we look at the threat vector and the different threat points that are vectors into our automotive industry, we have actually come together as an industry and have shared over 19 vulnerabilities in less than 12 months. So the industry is working together. This just gives you a really quick sense of what we've been doing over the last year. I want to point out one really important thing that we have just recently produced, and that is a document for our best practices for our members. We literally finished that up last week, and it is one in a series of 7. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But let me tell you a little bit what we've done in the last year. We have 16 OEMs with 12 affiliate members, which represent suppliers. And this represents 6 countries in 3 different continents. And during this time frame, we've also recognized that we had to have intel sources beyond just our own. So we have contracted to get those, and over 360 intel sources. Lots of activities with the press and coordinating with other ISACs, such as the National Council of ISACs, the Aviation ISAC, my favorite, that was in the past, and then of course some new ones, which include IT, communications, and many of the things that we're concerned about in this industry. And a lot of what they see, we're starting to see. So it's really helpful as we work together with them and we understand what they're seeing, because it helps us in our industry. Let me talk a little bit about what the ISAC does. First off, we are a nonprofit organization, and it's based on a public-private partnership model that was stood up back in '98 from a presidential directive. And since then, critical infrastructure sectors have been stood up across over, I think, 24 different sectors in the industry. And basically what we act as is a nonprofit organization to share threat intelligence, and by mitigating the disclosure, if you will, of specific individuals or companies. So they have a place where they can anonymously provide threat intelligence. And we also work to help mitigate those threats. We look at how maybe an incident is either evolved or what it may mean to our industry and how we can mitigate it. So one company's detection is another company's prevention. And overall, that helps us protect the whole industry. Really important as we come together, because if one of them sees it, the rest of them will see it. So very, very important what we do, and everyone needs to be at the table. So one of the tenets is everyone is welcome to come to the table and start to share. Our phased approach, as you look at this, as we start to develop these best practices, I'm not going to go into details here, we don't have the time, but this gives you an example of how we approach building our best practices. We're one of the first ISACs to actually build best practices. The first one we built was on incident response. Very good process, and we had everyone at the table building those best practices, by the way. 28 OEMs across the board. We had over 65 member companies participating in this, 75 hours of small and large working group sessions, coming together for over 1,000 hours of participation. And basically, once we've documented it, we're pushing those out and sharing that with the industry. We built an executive summary, followed by a reference model, and then you can see the 7 best practice guides that we're going to be producing. The first one was on incident response, so that we have an industry that's ready to react when needed. And working through those other 7, you can see we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but we're really excited about working together across the industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Faye. Okay. Let's get into it. So if you have questions, we'll start queuing up at the mics, but I'm going to ask a question just to get things going. Are things getting better? I opened the statement, we just started having the conversation 2 years ago. Are we moving in the right direction? Dan, we'll start with you.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely a lot of moves in the right direction, and I think there's a lot of organizations, part of in the automotive ecosystem that are addressing security as part of, a ground up. And I think in particular with security, I mean, it's like insurance. It's not necessarily something you really want to pay for, right? But you know, you really got to have it because it's necessary. And the earlier you start to look at that and build that into the architecture from the beginning, you know, the easier it's going to be to actually create a secure system. And I think we're seeing that with OEMs, tier ones, and also the industry organizations in this space.
Faye, what do you think? You've been looking at this. You met with the OEMs in the past few weeks. What do you think?
Oh, I think it's fabulous that the different OEMs are coming together. It's not competition, it's cooperation, right? And so working together and collaborating across the industry is a must-do. And they have come together really well. I'm very excited to see the level of engagement and the excitement around the table when we work together.
Sure. Carl, you're living this every week.
I think the trajectory we're on is fantastic. So as somebody that lived through the battles of the 90s against the operating systems and everything, the approach that the OEMs and the automotive community are taking to cybersecurity is radically different. They are addressing the issues much more quickly. They are putting protections in place much more quickly. The systems are more resilient then and safer, and there's also a higher degree of cooperation with government, the creation of test facilities, et cetera, that they'll need to validate and certify their products. So everything's good.
Well, thanks. We got one question over here.
Yeah, we talked hacking. Now let's talk viruses. We've got IoT, we've got cars. For example, you've got your phone. Now you've got your Bluetooth. Your phone's infected. It gets into your entertainment system. Now your car stops and starts and stops and starts. Your brakes fail. It's not hacking, it's a virus. So is the industry going to get together and create a different type of company? We have Symantec, we have McAfee now. Are you going to work with those organizations, those companies to create virus protection for cars and other types of vehicles? Or are you going to create your own so that you're on top of it quicker? Because as I see it, you're going to have to be faster than if you are just a standard computer user. Simply because if a computer gets a virus, you always have that virus protection going, on a regular, hopefully hourly or daily basis. But if you're in your car, when do you get updates? How do you get updates? How often do you get updates?
Right.
And if you're driving, you don't want your brakes to fail or to reboot.
Right. So no one's died in a cyber attack yet, right? So with that, how do we have that speed? How do we work with the industry, Karl?
So all of the points you bring up are good. One of the differences, though, is in the past several years there's been a change of thinking. And there's no longer really a belief that we can have a perfectly secure environment where nobody ever gets in, et cetera. And so what we're looking at instead, I'm not talking about any specific OEM or supplier, just generally the industry and cybersecurity, is the concept of resilience. This assumes that you've been compromised in some way, that there is an attacker or malware or something living on your system, and the system has to degrade in a predictable way to assure that certain core functionalities are preserved, that it must be able to reconstitute, fail gracefully and reconstitute to a known good state. This resiliency is part of a robust architecture, a modern architecture, and it is something that I know several people are developing. But if you're looking at the system as a hard outside or various balkanized systems inside that prevent any malware attackers from getting in, that's not the way modern thought is going with the architecture.
Yeah, it's okay. The ecosystem's moving. We now have suppliers talking to OEMs. How's that moving out to address?
Right, so part of what we're doing in the ISAC is to really work through what does that secure design look like, and that's going to be one of our best practice guides as well. So you have a great question, and it is a question that we really do need to put some thought into. How do we do it? What does it look like? Certainly we want to partner with those that have already done this and that do it well. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, but clearly there may be some special approaches that we need to take a look at from the automotive industry.
Yep.
A follow-up question. Now that cars are mostly networks, when are companies going to start firewalling the go-fast bits from the rest of the car? Because as you know, that's how things go bad.
Right.
One of my things is first think evil. I teach cybersecurity along with being a tech blogger. So that's where my mind always goes. So are you going to start creating firewalled systems where we no longer, part of the way you're going to get rid of viruses to make sure that everything is firewalled?
Right, great. So Dan, I'll let you take that one. You're living in the scene between product security, not just cars, but you're living that entire ecosystem every day over. What are you seeing with that? So thank you for the question.
Right. So I think we just have to, I mean, the car is obviously an extremely important thing to protect. And we need to kind of look at what is the value of what we're protecting and what is the amount of security that we actually need to apply to that object. So the things you were mentioning about virus, antivirus, and so forth, those would typically be kind of perimeter security solutions that prevent that. So if you think of a house, this would be your door, your windows, and things that protect you from someone actually getting in. But with cars, given the importance of having the critical systems running at all times, we need to think about different layers of security. So if someone actually breaks through the front door, what's going to happen then? Well, maybe you have a guard dog that come and actually bite you, if you get through. So there needs to be multiple layers of security that kick in at whatever stage. And then also the other aspect here as well, there has to be some form of monitoring going on as well. That might be the OEM will take responsibility for this. There might be a supplier, there might be a third party, whatever. It doesn't really matter. But I think it's important to have that information so you can understand what's going on with whatever you are responsible for, and so you can actually have a response to that real time and not 1 week later with an update.
Wonderful, thank you. One more question over here.
Hi, my name is Anthony. I have a question about the broad strategic architecture in terms of hacking from state actors or even non-state actors, referring specifically, let's say, to hacking 3D printers, which might create components for an airline or drones being used for commercial purposes. Has any thought been given to the whole broad strategic architecture in terms of what, say, North Korea might do if they all at once wanted to hack the commercial drones, 3D printers, and automobile mass transit?
Right. So Faye came to us from the aviation industry just a couple weeks ago and was dealing with similar issues, especially what's happening over there. Why don't you address that one first, Faye?
Well, I'd be happy to try to answer that one. We hadn't gotten very far as 3D printing yet in the commercial aviation world. I mean, clearly, I saw something yesterday on Divergent 3D, I think it was, where they printed a car. So there are possibilities, of course, of cyber events happening there. But just as serious could be even chips. I mean, are the chips where they're being manufactured, what's already on the firmware, software, et cetera. So I think you have to look at all of these elements. Is there a simple answer? I don't think so. We have to look at this through the whole supply chain and the entire life cycle. And that makes it complex, right? So this is a complex system of systems activity that require everyone to be present, from the manufacturers through the supply chain to the dealerships, all the way down to the users. So I think an earlier question about what do we do as far as antivirus software updates. We know that in our computer, goes out, reaches out, and it automatically updates. We have to have a similar activity even for what we're designing in automotive. I mean, it's just going to have to happen, whether it's you go to the oil change and you get that update patch, or however it's going to be designed. Regarding long-term manufacturing, though, I mean, clearly that is an area that we looked at quite a bit in aviation. And I can tell you that there were parts that were starting to come in that we recognized had some issues. And even the supplier didn't realize they had the issue because they had bought component parts from a place that they didn't realize had a virus on it. So this is a situation that can happen in any industry, and it's one that we have to systematically address through good systems engineering, good design, as we just heard earlier, design security in depth, and of course, vigilance and resiliency building.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any follow-up? Dan, Karl, anything to add? No? Okay.
Looking forward, thanks for looking forward forward-looking for hacking. But today's problem right now is Keycode harvesting, where they harvest the key codes, break into the cars, and so forth, or amplifying the seeking codes
where it can amplify that code and get the key code right out of your pocket while you're sitting at home. So what's happening with key code harvesting?
Right. Karl, Dan, do you want to take this one first? And, yep, Karl?
You can take.
So that has been a traditional problem. There are many suppliers and manufacturers that are working on hardening their key codes. I expect this problem to become greatly less in the very near future. I'm sorry, I can't get specific though. But it's an active problem. There's active research. There's a lot of engineering work going into this.
In the previous question, you talked about state actors. Now you're talking about criminal organizations. And this is what we're seeing a big difference within the hacking world. Once you can start making money off of hacking, this is where it changes. You look at the retail breaches a couple of years ago. It's because they made money. And so we talk about the doomsday scenario of the Tom Clancy, I'm going to brick 10,000 cars. Where you're going, that certainly is what's happening right now because you can make money out of it.
Yeah, it's happening tonight.
That's happening tonight. That's great. So a follow-up question with that, with you three is, where do we need to go next? Okay, so I'm amazed at what's happened in the last 2 years. Press and researchers and government and industry have all pushed this forward. But what are we going to be talking about in 2 years that we've accomplished? And I'm amazed at where we are with our autonomous vehicles right now, what happened with the DOT guidance. I mean, we're moving quickly down that. How does that fit within the autonomous vehicle discussion? So where are we going to be, what are we going to be talking about in 2 years on the stage? Dan first, and then we'll go down.
Right. Yeah, I think we're going to have addressed a lot of the basic problems in 2 years from now. And also I think in 2 years we're going to have a much higher degree of connectivity and also connected services in our vehicles than we have today. I think we'll see more third-party devices talking to the car or being used in conjunction with the vehicle. And I hope that we will have accomplished actually a secure ecosystem in the sense that you protect whatever your mobile phone is doing with your car or any other type of device. And also, since the automotive ecosystem is extremely wide, we have dealerships that plug in various things into your car when it's in for service, etc. The attack surface is just enormous. And I think by that time we should have been able to map out the whole industry and every potential attack vector in this whole system. Because right now there's a lot of focus on the vehicle itself, but there's a lot of problems with workshop dealerships and anyone who actually interact with the car as well.
That's great. So Karl, Faye, bring us home. Karl, 30 seconds. What's going to happen?
We'll have a secure over-the-air update consensus. It will be implemented in some, but maybe not all vehicles. We will have guidance from the federal government on what sort of minimal standards are. There are currently working groups trying to express that. I think a lot of research will move to the aftermarket, where you've got developers, for instance, the SEMA Association, developing products for cars, not in sync with the architectural designs of the OEMs. They have to get in sync. There has to be a socket there that they can communicate over, and communication infrastructure, because I think the cities are becoming the next soft spot.
Faye, last comments.
I'll just say that this is all about collaboration, cooperation, and education. So I'd like to see that by 2 years we really understand this problem set much better. We have a solution for it, and we're working together to ensure that we really make our industry safe.
Wonderful, thank you. Karl, Dan, Faye, thanks so much for a great conversation, and we'll see you next year, in 2 years maybe, having a further on conversation than this, see how far we've gone. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.